The sun dipped low in a hazy, green-tinged sky, casting a sickly light over the silent ruins of what had once been a bustling city. Pavement cracked and buckled under vines that pulsed faintly, wrapping around skeletal streetlights like they were reclaiming lost territory. A lone figure strode down the empty street with precise, measured steps. Despite the decay around him, he was immaculate. His black tactical jacket hugged his frame, crisp and clean, as if he'd stepped straight out of a private security briefing instead of the end of the world. His shirt was buttoned to the collar, sleeves rolled to military precision. An old insignia on his shoulder, a faint emblem of his past life in private military work, was barely visible under the layer of dust. He scanned his surroundings, his gaze flicking up to the trees where squirrels huddled in eerie stillness. Their eyes glinted with a dark, intelligent focus, as if they were sizing him up, calculating. He kept moving, boots hitting the cracked pavement with a steady rhythm, his posture unyielding. At an overgrown street corner, he paused, pulling out a worn, dog-eared map. He traced a line along his route, adding a careful X with a black marker. It was a map of danger zones, safe paths, and territories where the mutated creatures lurked. He'd survived this long by treating each step like a mission. "Discipline keeps you alive," he muttered, voice low, almost reverent. A faint rustling nearby drew his attention, and his hand instinctively dropped to his belt where a combat knife hung, sharp and ready. His eyes narrowed as he spotted a figure, a man, or at least what looked like one, stumbling out from a nearby alley, his clothes torn, face pale. The man stopped, meeting his gaze with hollow, red-rimmed eyes. He looked human, but there was something wrong, something broken and hungry in his stare. "You alone?" questioned the military vet. The man nodded, his eyes darting to the trees as if expecting something to leap out at any moment. You haven't heard?" His voice was a dry whisper. "They've released it. The squirrels. They've poisoned the air," stated by the strange man. The sharp-dressed man's jaw tightened, though his face remained impassive. He'd heard rumors, fragments of the truth scattered like ash. The Tree Treaty, a failed attempt to broker peace. A betrayal. A chemical that had changed the very DNA of every living primate, twisting humanity into a shadow of itself. "I know," he replied. The stranger's gaze grew unfocused, and he stumbled closer, a strange gleam in his eye. "It's in the air. It's in us. Some of us changed. Others," he trailed off, the word unspoken but clear, "dead." A low growl sounded from the trees, and his hand tightened on his knife. In a flash, the stranger lurched forward, his mouth opening wider than it should, a gleam of bloodlust lighting his eyes. In a single fluid motion, the ex-professional gunman sidestepped, bringing the knife up with military precision. The blade sliced through the air, finding its mark, and the stranger crumpled to the ground in silence. He wiped the knife clean on his sleeve, his face unreadable. He'd seen worse. He'd done worse. Without a glance back, he marked another X on his map and continued down the road, each step a steady, rhythmic reminder of the discipline that had kept him alive. As he walked, his eyes scanned his surroundings, but his mind drifted back to life before the treaty, before everything had twisted into this nightmare. He remembered the sharp, orderly lines of barracks and briefing rooms, the low hum of machinery, and the simple satisfaction of knowing exactly where he stood in the world. Back then, his work had been clear-cut, protection contracts, high-stakes security, keeping high-value assets safe. There was a kind of honor in the structure, a reassurance that discipline could hold chaos at bay. "And we thought we knew chaos," he mused bitterly. "We didn't have a clue." He clenched his jaw as memories flickered like a slideshow of everything that had been lost. Humanity had come together once, in the wake of the environmental crisis, with an ambitious attempt to forge an alliance with nature. He recalled the promises, the optimism, the world's leaders smiling as they signed the Tree Treaty, a symbolic pact that would unite humans and the natural world in a bid for survival. But the squirrels, they'd been watching, waiting, and far sharper than anyone knew. Humanity had always underestimated them. Maybe it was the size, the twitching tails, or the small, quick movements that made them seem harmless. Now, those small eyes in the branches seemed to follow him with a precise, knowing gaze. He adjusted his grip on his knife, more to steady himself than anything. They were always there, skittering along branches just out of reach, slipping through the leaves like shadows. He'd felt their eyes on him for miles, silent observers charting his every step, every choice. How long have they been planning this? He wondered. How long have they waited, watching us build, destroy, and rebuild? Did they know we'd betray the treaty? A soft chittering echoed from above, and he glanced up, catching sight of a squirrel perched on a branch, its tail flicking in an odd, measured pattern. It was too focused, too deliberate, as if it were signaling to something else deeper in the trees. He quickened his pace, feeling their presence like 1,000 tiny eyes following him down the cracked and empty street. He'd seen it before. A band of survivors had tried to set up camp in an abandoned town not far from here. When he'd passed through, all that was left were claw marks in the dirt, tattered clothing, and a faint scent of decay. The squirrels had picked them off, one by one. He shook off the memory, forcing his thoughts back to survival. Discipline, routine, awareness. That's what keeps you alive. The mantra was as familiar to him as breathing, something he repeated when the world pressed in too close. But a part of him, buried deep under layers of training and habit, couldn't help but question how long discipline would hold out against nature turned ruthless. Against creatures that had been watching his every move from the start. As he walked, the distant silhouette of the town came into view, dark against the green-gray sky. This place, rumor had it, was a cache of forgotten supplies. Ammunition, weapons, and maybe, if he was lucky, a safe place to rest for a few hours without feeling those watchful eyes. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the crinkled map, worn soft from his constant adjustments and markings. Along the edges, various symbols marked known locations, circles for potential camps, triangles for traps, and slashes for areas crawling with it changed. This town, he'd marked with a square and a tiny bullet icon, his symbol for a possible weapons stash. But the map wasn't all hopeful markings. Near the bottom, at the edge of his journey's path, was a different symbol entirely. A black X, smudged and bold, its edges pressed down harder than any other mark on the page. He could feel his jaw tighten just looking at it. That was the place where he'd lost them, his team. We were trained for everything, he thought bitterly, eyes narrowing at the memory. Prepared for anything. Or so he thought. But when they entered that area, what was once a research facility, an outpost of bioengineers hoping to cure the virus, everything had gone sideways. He remembered the faint chemical haze, the sharp, metallic tang in the air that clung to his tongue. He forced himself back to the present, pushing the map back into his jacket. That black X haunted him. Even now, his muscles tightened just thinking about the look in their eyes, the fear, the disbelief. They had all been so highly trained, so sure of themselves, but in that moment, they'd been as helpless as anyone else. Not this time, he thought, steadying his breathing as he closed in on the town. He reached the first building on the town's outskirts, a decaying old gas station. Its windows were shattered, paint peeling in thick strips from the walls. He approached cautiously, fingers brushing over the grip of his Glock, his eyes flicking from shadow to shadow. He knew better than to assume he was alone. He slipped inside, checking each corner, every surface. His gaze lingered on the shelves, now empty except for a few rusted cans, but the counter was intact. Dust covered the surface, but beneath it, he saw faint scratches, marks left by something with claws, something that had dragged itself across the floor. Just as he was about to move further in, a creak echoed from the back room. He tensed, drawing his Glock and aiming it steadily at the door. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up, the sharp instinct that had saved him more than once. Discipline, routine, awareness, he murmured under his breath. He took a step forward, ready for whatever might be lurking behind that door.
Woo! Woo! I don't know you!
The forest swallowed him whole, a labyrinth of shadow and sound. He kept low, moving along trails worn smooth by the passage of deer and other wildlife. The scent of damp earth filled his nose, masking the faint metallic tang of his sweat. Each step was calculated, his boots silent against the soft ground, but his ears stayed sharp, tuned to every sound behind him. The squirrels were searching. He could hear their soft chittering in the distance, growing louder and then fading as they scoured the area. The changed followed, their grunts and labored wheezes like a macabre symphony. He pressed himself against a fallen log, cloaked by the dense underbrush, and held his breath. For a moment, the world seemed to shrink, just him and the muffled rhythm of his heartbeat. It was almost enough to drown out the memories that clawed their way to the surface. He saw his wife's face first. The way her hair caught the sunlight that morning in the garden, their son laughing as he darted between her and the rows of tomatoes they'd been tending. That was before the chaos. Before the news reports had turned from murmurs to screams, before the neighbors had locked themselves in their basements, or worse, fled and never returned. He had tried to protect them. They'd barricaded the house, stockpiled supplies, but nothing prepared him for the sight of his son's small hand slipping from his grip as the crowd surged and separated them. Nothing had prepared him for the haunting silence when he returned to the house, only to find it empty. A faint rustle snapped him back to the present. His Glock was in his hand before he realized he'd drawn it. He scanned the trees, his eyes narrowing. The forest was alive with motion. Branches swayed, leaves quivered, and for a heartbeat, he swore he saw the glint of tiny, watching eyes. The changed were closer now. He could hear their uneven footfalls, a staggering cadence that made his stomach knot. He tightened his grip on the Glock, running through his options. Firing would give away his position, and he wasn't sure how many rounds he had left. Instead, he stayed still, his body pressed against the damp earth. The creatures shuffled past, their movements painfully slow but unrelenting. A low groan sent a shiver down his spine, and he clenched his jaw as one of them paused, its head tilting as if it had caught his scent. The squirrels chittered again, their cries almost mocking. He imagined them spreading out like a web, their sharp eyes and nimble bodies scouring the forest for him. He couldn't run. Not yet. As the sun dipped lower, the forest darkened, shadows pooling at the base of trees. The squirrels' chatter began to fade, replaced by the nocturnal symphony of crickets and frogs. He waited until the last light bled from the horizon, his muscles stiff and aching from hours of stillness. Only then did he move, his steps careful and deliberate. His breath came shallow as he slipped through the trees, avoiding the paths that bore fresh claw marks, evidence of where the changed had recently passed. He didn't let himself dwell on the memories, not now. Grief was a luxury he couldn't afford. But as he glanced up at the faint outline of the moon filtering through the canopy, he murmured under his breath, "I'm sorry." It wasn't clear if the apology was for his wife, his son, or himself. The forest at night was a world unto itself, one that bore little resemblance to the world before the treaty. Back then, the dark had been calm, punctuated by the chirp of crickets and the occasional rustle of unseen creatures. Now it was alive with tension, a fractured ecosystem warped by the plague. The animals knew better than to linger near him. He could feel their eyes in the shadows, watching from a distance before darting away with a rustle of leaves. Rabbits froze mid-step, their noses twitching before vanishing into the underbrush. Even the deer, usually so bold in the safety of darkness, moved like ghosts, always keeping a safe distance. But not everything fled. A low, guttural sound drifted through the trees, making his grip on the Glock tighten. He'd seen them before, nocturnal primates twisted by the plague, their once dexterous hands now clawed and grasping. They moved with eerie silence, their glassy eyes reflecting the faintest light, scanning for prey. Unlike the changed, they hunted with purpose, and their strength was unsettling. He kept moving, navigating the uneven terrain with practiced care. The land was unforgiving, scarred by years of neglect and the slow creep of nature reclaiming what humanity had left behind. Clean water was harder to find than ammunition, and he had neither in abundance. The faint silhouette of a structure caught his eye through the trees. Curiosity and desperation pushed him closer, his steps cautious. As he neared, the shape solidified into an old stone well, moss-covered and leaning slightly to one side. He scanned the area for signs of recent activity, claw marks, discarded feathers, bones, but it appeared undisturbed. He crouched and peered into the well, his flashlight casting a pale beam down its depths. Water glinted faintly at the bottom, though it was impossible to tell if it was clean. He pulled a small metal cup from his pack and tied it to a length of wire, lowering it slowly until it dipped below the surface. The sound of the cup splashing was deafening in the quiet night, and he held his breath, ears straining for any sign of movement around him. The night stayed still, though he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. When he pulled the cup back up, the water inside was murky, flecked with bits of dirt and algae. He sniffed it, wrinkling his nose. It would need boiling, but even that wouldn't guarantee safety. Still, it was something. He stashed it in his pack, his eyes scanning the area again. Just beyond the well, an old farmhouse loomed, its paint long faded and its roof sagging in places. It stood apart from the forest, the ground around it barren and strangely untouched. No animals darted in or out of its crumbling walls, and even the plants seemed to avoid its foundation, their roots curling away like they knew better.
I don't know you!
He approached slowly, the hair on the back of his neck prickling. The place felt wrong, but the promise of shelter and possibly supplies was too tempting to ignore. His Glock stayed at the ready as he climbed the creaking steps to the porch, his boots kicking up a thin layer of dust. The door hung slightly ajar, and he nudged it open with the barrel of his gun. Inside, the air was stale but not putrid, a rarity in a world where decay was the dominant scent. The furniture was intact, though cloaked in thick layers of dust as if the place had been frozen in time. He stepped inside, his every movement careful. The house was eerily silent, the only sound the faint creak of the floorboards under his weight. No claw marks marred the walls, no feathers or fur littered the corners. It was as if no living thing had dared to enter. As he moved deeper into the house, his unease grew. The farmhouse wasn't just untouched, it was preserved, like a diorama of the world before. A family photo still hung on the wall, its colors faded, but the smiles intact. A cup sat on the kitchen counter, its contents evaporated, but the rim still showing the ghost of a stain. He frowned, his eyes narrowing. In a world where survival demanded constant motion, who would leave a home so intact? And why? The faint sound of rustling came from the attic above. His grip on the Glock tightened as he tilted his head, listening. It could be the wind, or it could be something else. He had a decision to make: investigate or barricade himself in for the night. Either way, the house was not as abandoned as it seemed. The attic stairs creaked under his weight, the sound unnervingly loud in the stillness of the farmhouse. He kept his Glock raised as he climbed, the faint rustle he'd heard earlier gnawing at the edge of his nerves. The air in the attic was stale and hot, thick with dust motes that swirled in his flashlight's beam. The space was cluttered with forgotten relics, a rocking chair draped in cobwebs, boxes with peeling labels, and a cracked mirror propped against the far wall. Then, he saw it, a fan mounted near a small, grime-covered window. It turned in slow, erratic jerks, its motor humming faintly. Electricity. His pulse quickened. Electricity was a rarity, a luxury in the post-treaty world. He stepped closer, shining his flashlight around the attic. A frayed cord snaked along the floor, disappearing through a small hole in the wall. He followed it with his eyes, piecing together the implications. If the fan worked, the house was connected to some kind of power source. Lowering his Glock slightly, he relaxed for the first time since entering the house. If he could get the lights working, he'd have a safer base to search for supplies and answers. He headed downstairs, flipping switches in the kitchen. A dim, flickering light buzzed to life overhead. He let out a low breath. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The farmhouse's odd preservation now felt like a responsibility. He couldn't explain it, but leaving it in worse condition than he found it seemed wrong. With that thought, he began his search, moving carefully from room to room. In a study just off the living room, he found a stack of maps, one of which mirrored the one in his pack almost exactly. He unfolded it, comparing the faded markings with his own, noticing trails and landmarks that didn't appear on his copy. Some routes were circled in red, with dates scribbled beside them. He tucked the map away and turned to a shelf lined with books and journals. One journal caught his eye, a slim, leather-bound notebook with a child's handwriting scrawled across the first page, Clara's diary. Flipping it open, he skimmed the entries. The writing was uneven, some lines shaky, as if written in fear. Daddy says the sickness won't come here. He built the wall strong, and the wires will keep us safe. He's always right. Mom says not to look out the windows at night. I asked why, and she just looked sad. I don't understand. I saw a squirrel today. Daddy said they're bad now, like the changed people, but it just looked hungry. I gave it some bread. Don't tell. His grip on the diary tightened as he turned the pages. Clara described her family's isolation, her father's frantic efforts to maintain their sanctuary, and her growing confusion as the world outside crumbled. The entries became sporadic toward the end, the handwriting increasingly erratic. The lights are blinking again. Daddy says it's the wires protecting us. But I heard something upstairs last night. It wasn't Mom or Daddy. He closed the diary, a faint unease settling over him. The house wasn't just a sanctuary, it was hiding something. In a corner of the study, he found a small box, sleek and unmarked, its edges glowing faintly. A series of lights on its surface blinked red and green in a pattern that felt deliberate. It reminded him of an old Wi-Fi router, though its function was a mystery. He debated tinkering with it but decided against it for now. If the house was still operational, tampering might risk shutting something critical down. He carried on, his curiosity leading him to a locked door at the end of the hall. It took a few solid shoves with his shoulder, but the door finally gave way, revealing a room unlike any other in the house. A massive satellite dish dominated the space, its surface gleaming under the faint glow of a single bulb overhead. Copper wires snaked across the walls, looping and tangling like veins feeding the machine. The air hummed faintly, the wires vibrating with energy. He stepped closer, running a hand along one of the wires. It was warm to the touch, pulsing faintly beneath his fingertips. The room felt alive, as though the satellite were the heart of the house, keeping it running against all odds. His eyes scanned the walls, noting diagrams and calculations pinned to a corkboard. Most of it was indecipherable, a mix of mathematical formulas and hand-drawn schematics. In one corner, a faded note caught his attention. It was scrawled hastily, the ink smudged. "Maintain the signal. They're listening." His gut twisted. Who was they? And what were they listening for? The sound of distant rustling reached his ears, pulling him out of his thoughts. He froze, his eyes darting to the door. The squirrels. They hadn't gone far. He backed out of the room, his mind racing. The farmhouse was more than it seemed, far more. But the night was waning, and the longer he stayed, the greater the risk of being discovered. He'd have to decide quickly, stay and dig deeper into the mystery, or leave before the forest's predators returned. The bathroom was small, claustrophobic even, but it was perfect. One way in, one way out. That was the rule, and he'd lived by it for years. He shoved the worn door closed, sliding the small bolt lock into place. Not much of a defense, but it bought time. And time was everything. A cracked mirror hung above the sink, catching slivers of his reflection in the moonlight slipping through the boarded window. His sharp eyes swept the room, tile floors, faded wallpaper peeling at the edges, and a bathtub littered with empty bottles of shampoo and soap. He pushed the useless clutter aside, clearing the counter to lay down his gear. His pack landed with a thud, its contents spilling onto the cold tile. Ammo, a knife, a half-eaten protein bar, and the journal. The leather cover was worn, the spine loose from years of use. He opened it with a kind of reverence, flipping past pages filled with looping cursive and smudged ink. His eyes landed on a fresh page, one he hadn't read before. January 14th. We're running low on everything. Dad says we need to ration harder. Sometimes I feel like it would be easier to leave, to take my chances outside. But Mom says this is where we're safe. This is where we survive. He ran a hand over his face, exhaling sharply. The edges of the page were torn, as though someone had gripped it too tightly. A distant creak echoed through the house. His head snapped up, every nerve on edge. He reached for his knife, his fingers brushing against its familiar handle. He waited, listening, but the silence pressed in again. He turned back to the journal. February 3rd. The water's gone bad. Mom says we can't drink it anymore. She's been boiling what she can, but the smell makes me sick. Dad hasn't come back yet. I'm scared he won't. The words blurred for a moment. He blinked, clearing his vision, and flipped to the next page. He wasn't sure why he kept reading. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was just a way to remember that the world hadn't always been this way. Another noise. His grip tightened on the knife, his breath steadying as he crouched low. One way in, one way out. If it came to it, he'd be ready.
Woo! Woo! I don't know you!
Or just an American dad. A soft noise broke the silence, a faint scraping sound, barely audible. His head snapped toward the door. A steady, rhythmic scraping, metal against stone.
Domination.
He pushed himself up, moving silently toward the window. He peered through a gap in the boards, his eyes narrowing against the morning light. A man was sitting by the shed. Daylight didn't make him any less threatening. The stranger's face was clear, sunken cheeks, a scruffy beard, eyes that darted around the yard like he was expecting trouble. His hands worked the blade with a practiced efficiency, sliding it across the whetstone. The machete or sword, maybe, looked sharp enough to split bone. With caution, he ducked out of sight, pressing his back to the wall. Why is he here? He slinked through the house, sticking to the shadows as he checked other windows. The man hadn't come closer, hadn't made a move toward the house. But he wasn't leaving either. He wouldn't trust me, he thought. In this world, trust was a luxury that got people killed. From another window, he studied the man again. The blade caught the sunlight, flashing briefly as the stranger held it up to inspect his work. His coat was worn, patched in places, the fabric stiff with grime. A pack leaned against the shed next to him. He's been out there a while. Is he waiting on me? This thought made his stomach clenched. Or is he scared to come inside? He moved back to the bathroom, packing his things with quick, precise movements. His knife was already on his belt. The gun went into its holster, the weight reassuring even with its dwindling ammo. The journal went into his pack, nestled between supplies he couldn't afford to lose. He glanced at the mirror again. In the daylight, he looked worse, shadows under his eyes, stubble creeping along his jaw. The scraping had stopped. He froze, listening. Footsteps, soft but deliberate, crunched outside the house. The stranger wasn't sharpening anymore. He was moving. He edged toward the front door, staying low. His hand hovered over the bolt as he peered through a crack. The stranger was standing now, the machete hanging loosely in his hand. He wasn't walking toward the house, just pacing, scanning the perimeter like he was deciding his next move. He doesn't know I'm inside, the thought arose. Good. His grip on the knife tightened. He couldn't wait this out forever. If the man got bold or desperate, there'd be no time to prepare. It was better to face him now on his terms. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. His pulse hammered in his ears, but his hands were steady as he unlocked the door. This is still survival. One way in, one way out. He stepped outside. The man didn't flinch as he watched him step out of the house. He stood by the shed, one hand resting on the machete, the other hanging loosely at his side. His eyes, sharp and calculating, locking into eye contact, but he didn't move. Didn't think anyone was here, the stranger said after a tense moment. His voice was gravelly, like someone who hadn't spoken much in a while. You're on private property, he said to the stranger. The man smirked, the corner of his mouth twitching upward. Yeah, I know. Mine. That gave him pause. He studied the man's face, searching for signs of deceit. The stranger seemed relaxed, almost casual, but his hand stayed near the machete. This place belonged to a family, he said in protest, his voice low. The stranger smirked, my name's Stan, and I rented it to them. The man nodded toward the house. Years ago. A good deal for both of us until the world went to shit. This answer didn't get a response, but his grip on the knife loosened just slightly. They're gone now, aren't they? The stranger asked. His tone was flat, more statement than question. Still no answer, but the silence was enough. The stranger sighed, stepping back from the shed and pointing toward the surrounding yard. Your first clue should have been the wildlife or the lack of it. Haven't seen a bird, squirrel, or even a bug, have you? It was true. The silence around the property had been unnerving since the moment he arrived. It's the signal, Stan continued, slinging the machete over his shoulder. The guy who lived here worked for Dark Industries. You've heard of them? The name struck a chord. Dark Industries research, tech, the rumors of projects that pushed ethical boundaries even before the collapse. He wired the property to keep it safe, the man explained. Tied it to a satellite network. Emits a frequency that repels natural life. Animals, insects, you name it. They won't come near the place. Narrowing his eyes, he questioned. And how do you know that? The man shrugged. I installed it for him. Part of the deal when I rented this place out. He wanted a safe house for his family. I wanted a way to keep tabs on what he was working on. Win-win, back then. He gestured for our hero to follow. Warily, he did, keeping a careful distance between them. The man led him toward the edge of the property, stopping at a jagged line where the grass changed abruptly. On one side, the yard was lush and green, almost unnaturally so. On the other, the grass was sparse, the ground cracked and dry. "Here's your boundary," the man said, gesturing with the machete. "Step outside, and you're in the real world. Step inside, and you're safe from anything with a heartbeat." He crouched, running his fingers over the grass. The difference was stark, like two different worlds pressed together. "There's a catch," Stan added, his voice quieter now. "Overexposure to the signal messes with your head. Hallucinations. Paranoia. Saw it happen to the guy who lived here. Guess he thought keeping the wild out was worth losing a bit of himself." He thought of the journal, the fraying entries near the end, the frantic handwriting. "How long do I have?" he asked. The man tilted his head, considering him. "Depends. You feel like you're dreaming yet?" The question hung in the air, the weight of it settling in his chest. The stranger motioned for him to follow, setting off toward the tree line. His movements were unhurried, but there was a quiet confidence in the way he walked, like he had nothing to fear within these boundaries. "You've seen the property line," Stan said over his shoulder. "Now let me show you the rest." Following cautiously, keeping a hand near his knife. This stranger didn't seem like the type to let his guard down entirely, and neither was he. Chapter 5. What Lives Below. The air grew colder as they descended, the faint hum from the satellites fading with each step. The stairs were steep, carved into the earth, their walls lined with rusted metal that seemed to amplify every sound, the scrape of boots, the faint echo of breathing. Stan moved with practiced ease, his voice carrying back through the gloom. The satellites aren't just a fence. They're a dome. Frequencies overlap in a sphere, expanding outward from each unit. Up top, the signals meet and saturate everything on the ground, the air, even the trees. He listened in silence, letting one hand trail the cool metal of the wall. "But down here," Stan continued, his voice calm, almost detached. "We're below the threshold. Far enough that the signal barely touches us. The world up there might be a hallucination waiting to happen, but down here, it's stable." Our hero frowned. Stable, he thought. For how long? A new sound reached them, faint at first but growing louder as they descended, a chorus of barking. Stan stopped, tilting his head toward the sound. "That'll be the dogs," he said, a small smile tugging at his lips. This caused him to stiffen, his hand instinctively moving to his knife. "A pack?" Stan chuckled softly. "You could call them that. They're our family pets. They've lived down here with us for years." He hesitated, listening. The barking was sharp, high-pitched, a mixture of excitement and warning. The sound stirred something in him, a strange mix of unease and relief. Natural life. He let out a slow breath, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. He hadn't realized how much he missed the sound of something real. The barking pulled him somewhere else, a memory unbidden and sharp. He saw his son, barefoot in the yard, laughing as a golden retriever bounded after him. The dog was new to the neighborhood, always trotting up to greet anyone it could find. His son had adored it, the two inseparable for those few weeks before the chaos began. The image shifted, darker now. Squirrels, hundreds of them, pouring into the streets, their tiny bodies moving like a single, writhing mass. the retriever barking, then howling as it tried to protect the boy. The world had tilted then, the familiar turning monstrous in an instant. "Hey!" Stan's voice snapped him back to the present. Before he could respond, a blinding light flooded the stairwell, spilling down in sharp, bright beams. He instinctively raised a hand to shield his eyes. "What the hell, Stan?" "It's normal," Stan said quickly. "Just the motion sensors kicking on. They're programmed to light the way when someone's coming or going. Nothing to worry about." Our main character blinked, lowering his hand. The harsh brightness seemed out of place in the claustrophobic stairwell, but Stan's calm demeanor steadied him. The barking grew louder, echoing from below. "They know we're coming," Stan said with a small chuckle. "They'll calm down once they've seen you." He nodded slowly, shaking off the memory that had gripped him moments earlier. He forced himself to focus on the present, following Stan deeper into the unknown. The narrow stairwell suddenly widened, the metal walls giving way to open space. He stopped in his tracks, blinking as his eyes adjusted to the new scene. The path opened into a vast, cavernous expanse. The ceiling arched high above, shrouded in shadow, while the ground stretched out in every direction, uneven but surprisingly clear. In the distance, massive caves gaped like dark mouths, their entrances jagged and foreboding. Other tunnels branched off at odd angles, disappearing into the unknown. The air shifted, carrying with it a faint, acrid smell, earthy but tinged with something metallic. It was faint enough to dismiss, but just strong enough to linger at the edges of his senses. A low rumble pulled his attention, followed by the thunder of paws against the ground. 3 mastiff-like dogs barreled toward them, their massive forms rippling with muscle, their ears perked. "Easy, boys," Stan called, his tone light but firm. The dogs slowed as they neared, tails wagging as they surrounded Stan. One nudged at his leg, another sniffed at his hands, while the third, the largest, stopped short and eyed our main character warily. He tensed, his hand hovering near his weapon, but Stan shook his head. "They're harmless, long as they know you're with me." With this, he exhaled slowly, letting his hand drop. The dogs sniffed him over, their dark eyes sharp and curious, before losing interest and trotting ahead. "That's Duke, Tink, and Bella," Stan said, gesturing to each in turn. "The other 2 are with the kids." "The kids?" he asked, surprised. Stan smirked. "I'll introduce you. But first, we head there." He pointed to a house in the distance, one of 3 scattered across the field. It looked small from here, its shape blurred by the hazy light, but the idea of something as ordinary as a house in this strange underground world felt jarring. As they walked, the curiosity built from glancing at the caves and tunnels that dotted the edges of the field was electrifying. The air seemed to shift as they passed, carrying faint noises, scratches, faint echoes, a distant hum that didn't match the satellite's frequencies. "What's in those tunnels?" he asked, his voice low. "Depends," Stan replied, his tone unreadable. "Some lead to storage. Some lead nowhere." "And the others?" Stan didn't answer immediately, his gaze fixed on the house ahead. "Let's just say it's best to stay on the main paths." Frowning at Stan's words, his curiosity burning. "Must have dumbass on my forehead," he muttered under his breath. The smells grew stronger as they walked, wet earth, oil, and something sharper, like ozone after a lightning strike. He caught himself glancing over his shoulder more than once, the shadows of the caves feeling like eyes. The faint sounds, rustling, scraping, an occasional low moan, set his nerves on edge. "Stan," he said finally, his tone wary. "What else is down here?" Stan gave him a sidelong glance. "You're asking a lot of questions for someone who just got here." He narrowed his eyes at Stan, but said nothing. As they neared the house, the dogs darted ahead, barking and circling near the front door. The sight of them, so normal in their excitement, clashed with the strangeness of the place, leaving our main character uneasy. "You'll get your answers," Stan said, gesturing for him to follow. "But first, let's eat." Inside the house, the space was simple but functional. A low table sat in the center of the room, flanked by mismatched chairs. A single lantern illuminated the space, casting long, flickering shadows against the rough walls. Stan gestured for his visitor to sit, then leaned back against the table, crossing his arms casually. "So," Stan said, breaking the silence, "you got questions?" He didn't hesitate. "Plenty." He leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "For starters, how long have you been here? Underground, I mean." Stan raised a brow. "Since the satellites went live, give or take. That's 5 years? Maybe 6? And you've never left?" "Only to grab supplies. But there's not much worth leaving for these days." His gaze narrowed. "And the family that lived here before? What happened to them?" Stan's expression tightened, but only for a moment. The signal got to them. They stayed too long above ground. Hallucinations, paranoia. They moved on before it got worse. "And you stayed behind?" "Someone had to." Our main character studied Stan's face, searching for any crack in his calm demeanor. "What about the signal down here? You're far enough to avoid it, sure, but you're still close. How do you know it's safe long-term?" Stan's lips twitched into a faint smile. "You're thorough. I like that. But trust me, we've tested it. Monitored ourselves, kept records. No symptoms. Not down here." This wasn't enough to fully convince him. "And the satellites? They're still functioning after all this time? No maintenance issues?" Stan shrugged. "They were built to last. Some kind of advanced tech, something Dark Industries was testing before everything went to hell. As long as they're up there, they keep working." He shifted in his seat. "You've got a pretty good setup here. But that smell outside, the noises, what else is down here?" Stan's eyes flicked toward the window, his expression briefly clouding. "Not everything's perfect," he admitted. "The tunnels have their quirks. Sounds carry in strange ways underground. But there's nothing dangerous." "And the smell?" "Earth. Old wiring. The occasional sulfur pocket." He waved a hand dismissively. "Nothing that'll kill you." He leaned back, crossing his arms. "Why are you telling me all this? You don't even know me." Stan chuckled softly. "Because you're here now, and you'll figure it out one way or another. Might as well hear it straight." A long silence stretched between them before our main character finally nodded. "Fair enough." He stood, his posture more relaxed now. "If you've got anything that needs doing, I don't mind lending a hand."